the last weeks of January 1968, Syd Barrett came to a rehearsal with a new song. He played it once for the band. It seemed simple enough, so they tried to learn it. But every time they played it back to him, he said, "Have you got it yet?" And they said no. So he played it again. And again, it was different. The chords had shifted. The melody had changed. The structure was not the structure they had just tried to learn. They never got it, because there was nothing to get. The song called "Have You Got It Yet" was designed to be unlearnable, changing each time Syd played it so that no one could ever follow. Whether this was a deliberate joke or something else entirely, nobody has ever been able to say for certain. This is where the story of Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd ends, and where another story begins. On the 6th of April 1968, Pink Floyd announced that Syd Barrett was no longer a member of the band. It was not a dramatic announcement. There was no press conference, no statement from Syd, no public argument. It was simply noted in a short paragraph in the music press that he had left. The band's management, Peter Jenner and Andrew King, had already decided to stay with Syd rather than with Pink Floyd. They believed, as many people did at the time, that Syd Barrett was the creative center of the band, that without him, Pink Floyd would amount to nothing. They were wrong about that, but they were right about something else. Syd Barrett was extraordinary, and what happened to him next was one of the most painful stories in the history of British music. After leaving Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett spent most of 1968 out of the public eye. He moved between flats in London. He painted. He wrote. He was seen occasionally by friends, turning up unannounced, staying for a while, then disappearing again. In May 1968, his manager, Peter Jenner, brought him into EMI Studios on Abbey Road to begin recording solo material. The sessions were difficult from the start. Jenner found that Barrett could play and sing, often beautifully, but could not reliably record the same song twice. Vocal takes were missed entirely. Songs started and never finished. The project was eventually abandoned. By the end of 1968, Syd Barrett had returned to Cambridge. He moved back in with his mother. He had been one of the most celebrated musicians in Britain. Now he was 22 years old, living in his childhood bedroom, and the world had already moved on without him. In the spring of 1969, Barrett returned to London and tried again. Malcolm Jones, the head of EMI's New Harvest Records label, took over as producer, and for a time things went surprisingly well. Jones later recalled that Barrett, in those early sessions, seemed remarkably together, focused, productive, capable. Within their first 5 hours together, they recorded vocal and guitar tracks for 6 songs. Jones had discovered something important. The faster they worked, the more focused Barrett became. If you gave him time to think, he drifted. If you kept him moving, he delivered. Session musicians were brought in, Robert Wyatt and Hugh Hopper from Soft Machine, Jerry Shirley from Humble Pie. They recorded around Barrett rather than with him, filling in parts after he had laid down his guitar and voice, building arrangements around a center that was never entirely stable. Then, in May 1969, Barrett tracked down David Gilmour in Ibiza and asked him to take over. Gilmour agreed. He came back to London with Roger Waters. Together, they finished the Madcap Laughs in what Gilmour later described as a 2-day sprint. The sessions were deeply frustrating. Barrett was difficult to direct. No 2 takes of any song were the same. Gilmour and Waters could not edit takes together. because the timing never matched from one to the next. They had to coax multiple complete performances out of Barrett and then choose. Gilmour later said, "It was just going into the studio and trying to get him to sing." Some of what they captured, including a false start and a moment where Syd loses his place entirely, was left on the album deliberately, not as a mistake, as evidence. The Madcap Laughs was released in January 1970. It sold 6,000 copies in its first few months. It reached number 40 on the UK charts. The reviews were mixed. Some critics heard something extraordinary, a fractured genius recording songs that nobody else could have written. Others heard the album as evidence of a breakdown, unfocused, unfinished, uncomfortable to listen to. Both of those responses were, in their own way, correct. The Madcap Laughs is not a polished record. It is not coherent in the way that The Piper at the Gates of Dawn was coherent, but it contains songs, Terrapin, Dark Globe, Long Gone, that are as beautiful as anything Barrett ever wrote. Songs that seem to come from somewhere the listener cannot follow but cannot stop trying to reach. Syd Barrett himself was ambivalent. He told a journalist, "I liked what came out, only it was released far too long after it was done." He also said, "I've got it at home, but I don't listen to it much now." On the 6th of June, 1970, Syd Barrett gave his one and only solo performance. It was at the Kensington Olympia in London. He was backed by David Gilmour, the man who had replaced him in Pink Floyd, and Jerry Shirley on drums. They played 4 songs: Terrapin, Gigolo Aunt, Effervescing Elephant, Octopus. For the first 3 songs, Barrett's vocals were nearly inaudible. Nobody in the audience could hear him singing. Then, at the end of the 4th song, Octopus, Syd Barrett took off his guitar, he put it down, and he walked off the stage. He did not say anything, he did not bow, he just left. It was the first and last time Syd Barrett ever performed alone in public. If this story moved you, subscribe. There are more of them, and not one of them ordinary.